Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue au Bracket Show. Bruno Barrette en direct de Confoo à la première journée et j'ai la chance d'avoir avec moi Kevin Goldsmith. Kevin, hi, how
Hello,
are you?
thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks to you. Before we get started on the subject of the interview, maybe introduce you, what you do to get people to know you.
Sure. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Anaconda, the data science and Python company. I joined the company relatively recently in the fall, but I've been a CTO for the past 5 years now. Prior to that, I was VP of Engineering at Spotify in Stockholm. I've spent 9 years at Adobe as a developer, then lead, then manager, then director. I was 8 years at Microsoft. I worked at IBM Research. I've worked in lots of different places, both very, very big companies, obviously, and also lots of startups as well.
Cool. So you wanted to talk today about moving from a developer role to a lead role.
Yeah.
Which is funny because this is something I experienced 2 years ago. So my first question on this would be, what are the reasons a developer should start thinking about this move?
This is an interesting question because it's an actual, I look at it as a career change. It seems very natural to go from being a developer on a team to kind of taking on more of a leadership role and being the lead on the team. But really, you're starting down a completely different career path. So I made the mistake that the first time I became a lead, I thought I wanted to be a lead because I wanted to kind of help direct the development. And that was the real reason. And I was a pretty crummy lead. I wasn't very good at the job for that reason. It was only later that I kind of found the excitement around all the other parts of the job, which is mentoring other developers and thinking strategically, kind of longer timelines, and working with product managers and test managers and kind of those peers in a different way. Once I discovered that was really what got me to then kind of really take that role seriously and focus on getting better. So that's an important thing. If you're considering becoming a lead or a developer and you're thinking maybe I want to be a lead, spend some time, like read some books, read some blogs, talk to leads at your company to understand what the job is and make sure that that's actually really interesting to you. Because you may be coding for a little while still, but long term, that's not that job. The job goes in a very different direction over time.
That takes me perfectly for the second question, because this depends on workplaces, but do you think a lead is someone that writes less code or that doesn't write code anymore?
This is going to come a lot down to your company and your company culture, but also to the size of the team. So in a small team, if you have a lead that's only managing, like me as kind of a CTO, my question is, what are they doing with their day, right? There isn't that much work to do as a lead in a really small team. But when your team starts to grow, when your team gets to be a bigger sized team, your management and lead job starts taking all of your time. So it's really a transition over time. I think you move into the role. Normally the way we do it, every company works differently, but normally the way we do it is you're first managing a little team and then your team grows over time as you get better at the job. And what will happen is you are maybe coding still every day and then less and less and less over time. So yeah, it's a transition. It's got to be a transition. But I would say that if you're leading a small team, you should still probably be a contributor on the team. If you're leading a bigger team, you usually don't have that kind of time.
Okay. Do you think every developer is fit to become a lead?
Absolutely not. No, totally not. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go on. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one of the things that we've improved on in like the technology industry, we've gotten a lot better at, is we've actually, a lot of companies now have separate individual track and management track. So if you really love coding and you really love being like very hands-on technical, you can continue to grow in your career and to get promoted and move into more and more senior roles without having to move into management. I think it used to really be, there was one track, you started as a developer and moved into management. So that's like a good thing that we've done, because if the only way to move up in your career is to become a manager, you have people becoming managers for very bad reasons, and people who aren't good at it, right? You want to be good at your job.
Yeah. I've got a question about this that I'll keep for later, but maybe on the aspect of becoming a lead. What makes a good lead?
I think it is, again, like this is one of these things, if I was going to write an autobiography someday, it would be called It Depends. Because it depends. It depends on the company and the company culture, right? So you have some companies are very into building autonomous teams, and the expectations on a lead are very, very different than other companies that are more kind of top-down command and control structure style. The amount of accountability you're expected to demonstrate, all those kinds of things. So it's going to depend on you, and it's going to depend on the company you work in. However, there are a few things I think are fairly common. One, you have to have a level of empathy. You have to care about the people on your team. You have to feel a level of responsibility towards them, that you are there to support them, right? If you're thinking about them there to support you and make you look good, you're probably not going to be really effective. I think you mentioned, or maybe alluded to, like, do you need to be technical or non-technical? I do know that there have been many successful kind of people who've not even come through development or engineering and have become like effective leads or managers of engineering teams. I kind of believe you should have a technology background. You don't necessarily need to be, like, if you're managing a mobile development team, you don't necessarily have to have been like an iOS developer or something. But I do think it's good to have at least a background in the work that the team, in technology, whether or not you're coding on the team. So I do think, like, coming from the world that the people that work for you come from is an important thing. I think that caring about the job and being serious about the job, like if you're a developer and you love coding, you're going to be reading coding blogs, and you're going to be looking at cool projects on GitHub and doing, maybe doing personal projects if you have time and that kind of stuff because you enjoy it. The managers I've seen, the leads I've seen that have been really great, actually care about that just like they care about coding or something like that. They read the blogs, they attend conferences like Confoo, because they want to get better at that job too. So I think those things are important.
Okay. Is there something that will make a difference in becoming a lead in the actual pandemic context? Because it's not the same thing as being with people hands-on in the office.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. The last year, even though I think we, software writers, like, we've always been jobs that theoretically in a lot of companies were distributed, so it's not been as strange to us as it has been for other industries. But at the same time, we've seen like how office centric some of our companies can be. One of the things that I've done, and I've led distributed teams for a long time, and I've kind of worked separately from my teams here and there for periods of time. This is the first time I spent like a year working, from home. And my company at Anaconda, we are distributed moving forward, so I will be working from home possibly forever.
Okay.
One thing that we've done, and I've encouraged the folks on my team to do, is write stuff down more. That's a big change in our culture. So when you can count on bumping into somebody, getting coffee in the office, in the kitchen, or you just know you're going to bump into them in a meeting. You don't write stuff down. You just say, when I see them, I'll talk to them about stuff. Or you can bring together groups in a very ad hoc way to kind of figure out a technical problem or that kind of thing. With the pandemic specifically, it's not just that we're all working from home, it's that we're working from home with our kids in the next room, and we're working from home, maybe having to take care of somebody in the family, or all these kinds of other things that are very, very different than when we all go into an office. And so because of that, even if we're working the same hours, you and I may be having very different kinds of days, and our availability may be different. And because of that, I've really worked on writing things down, sharing documents, collaborating through documents in an offline way instead of assuming just everything's online, because it just works differently. I think that's actually helped us a lot. Like, even when we kind of moved past the pandemic, I think for us as now a remote first company, we will continue with those practices because they've worked out really, really well for us.
And for people that will eventually come back to the office, but that are now lead from home, eventually in the office, are there things that you need to do differently? Are there things that you might stop doing when you're going back to the office, or should you just do it in the same way all the time?
Well, even the companies that I think are planning to return to the office kind of post-pandemic, a lot of them kind of, because of the pandemic experience, they're opening up the expectations around that. I'm sure some companies are going to go back to being, no, we expect you to be in the office every day, 9 to 5 or whatever. But a lot of companies are saying, no, we're going to ask you to you can be in the office 2-3 days a week, and it's giving people much more flexibility. And so what that means is you're going to have to think very carefully, again, around, as a team lead, what are the things you want to bring the team together in person for? And what are the things that you want to let the team kind of do their own thing in their own time? How much do you want to lean on some of the virtual team stuff that we've used during the pandemic? How much do you want to enable that? And it's about you setting expectations for your team and being really clear about them. That's one of the things that we're going to have to really change. We can't assume people are in the office. We can't assume things are going to work the way they will. And so we need to be really intentional and communicate with the team and make sure they understand our expectations on them. Okay.
So I'm going back to what we spoke about earlier about having different tracks nowadays where you can be more technical expert and more lead management tracks. Maybe a difficult question, but someone that becomes a lead and eventually realizes he's not or she's not fit for the job.
Yeah.
What are the options from this person's perspective? Because from management, obviously, there's a few options, but from the person's perspective, it might be different. What you can do about that?
So the best versions of these sort of dual career track systems I've seen actually have an equivalence at each level, right? So that people can transition from management into IC or IC into management. That in an ideal situation, you have that option where you can actually transition between these in a maybe not seamless, but relatively simple way. If you don't have that benefit, again, you can still transition. I was a lead, transitioned to being a developer. I became a more senior developer, went to being a manager. I did that back and forth actually a number of times as I was trying to figure out what I really wanted to do with my life, I guess. And so that is certainly something that's possible. When the thing to understand is if you've gone down this manager track for a while, you may need to reskill a little bit and kind of catch up because you aren't coding every day anymore. You may need to spend a little bit of time, but that transition, it's not like it's completely gone from your head. So that may be a short period of time, but it's certainly always going to be an option to you. And a good company will allow you to do that. They'll make it possible for you to do that. Be aware, again, depending on the company and depending on the culture and depending on your boss, that may also include, like, if you may have been a fairly senior manager and now you're going to be maybe a mid-level or even lower level developer, especially if you're kind of moving into a new area that you haven't worked in before. You shouldn't expect to necessarily be paid like a senior manager, moving down into being like a mid or junior developer necessarily. One decision you may have to encounter.
And isn't also the people's perception of this tricky in making a decision? Let's say you're a lead and you say, okay, that's not for me. I want to go back to being a developer.
Yeah.
But now you know people around you will think, oh, he was not good. How can you deal with this with your colleagues? Because the manager is saying, your upper management saying you're going back to a developer role. That's one thing.
Right.
But
Right.
people around you, they'll perceive it in many different ways.
You know, to an extent, you can't control what people's perceptions are going to be, but I actually
Right.
think it's an incredibly positive thing to be able to say, I tried this, I didn't like it, or it wasn't for me, or I don't think I'm as good at this as I am at being a developer, so I'm going to transition. I'm going to choose to, there's, again, it's different if it's chosen for you versus you making the decision yourself. But if you make the decision yourself and the company supports you, like, that's awesome, right? I would be less worried about the perception around that, only also because, one, as I said, I've done it, but I've had managers that report to me that did it as well. And usually people look at it as, that's cool. Like, you aren't locked into this kind of thing, and it lets them say, well, maybe I want to try management. I know that if it doesn't work out, I have other options.
Yeah, you're not being promoted until you become incompetent in what you do.
Exactly. The
Yeah,
Peter
so
principle.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's all the questions I have. That was really interesting. I hope people see it the same way in case they're about to live that move or they're actually in it.
Yeah.
So hopefully it will help them.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I hope so.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for your time, Kevin.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.
If anybody has any questions, either ask them in the chat, or I guess ask them in the chat. One of us can answer. What are the typical mistakes developers do when they're promoted to managers? That's a good. So Andre, yeah, that's a good question. Well, Bruno, you've just made that move. What do you think?
I'm thinking about it right now. I think one of the mistakes I could have made, but I avoided by doing a training about management, but it's just improvising yourself a manager. And maybe it's also different in my context because we're a flat organization. So I'm not the people's boss. I'm at the same level. I'm not their superior. There's nothing like this. So it's literally becoming a helping hand, more of a servant leader. So I think that's the kind of move that might be a typical mistake, is to try to act like the boss.
Yeah.
If you're trying to act like it, people won't talk to you, won't open up to you, and the next day you'll learn that they're leaving for another company. So
I think
it's tricky.
I think that's absolutely right. I think I've seen that mistake. I've probably done that mistake of like, oh, hey, I'm the boss now, and I'm going to act I'm either going to act differently, or I'm going to act like I think a boss should act, as opposed to being kind of who I am, like playing a role, especially if people know you and all of a sudden you change. It's really weird. But also, I think the other thing I've seen is the mistake that developers make a lot, especially if you go from being a dev on the team to being the lead of the team, is you kind of go the other way. You're like, hey, I'm still one of you, but you're not anymore. Whether no matter kind of what kind of culture you have, if you're in that role where now all of a sudden you are controlling salary, like you're controlling people's raises or hiring and firing, even if you're the same person and everyone around you is the same, your role is different. And if you kind of ignore that or pretend, oh, it's all the same, you're going to put yourself in bad situations. You can't make the same jokes you used to make because they come off very, very different. For example, like I've seen kind of developers move into management and kind of, hey, we're all just friends. We all have hung out, and they do like jokes like, hey, I'm raining pink slips. Wow, that is not funny anymore. That was funny when you were a developer. It's not funny when you're a manager, even if the two things are one day apart. So those are definitely the mistakes I see. Like either pretending are trying to be a boss all of a sudden, or pretending you're not. You're still just one of the team because your role is different.
It's okay to do jokes as long as they're not going overboard, and that the expectations of what you have to do are clear. If upfront they know that, well, yeah, I'm still one of you, but I have to do this. And if someone screws up really badly, I have to fire you. Well, at least they know. If you don't tell them, maybe that could be a mistake. If you don't tell them what are your expectations in this role.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Establishing expectations, and also honestly, if you're new to the role, being honest about like, hey, I'm figuring this out and I'm going to make mistakes, and making it clear to the extent that you are happy to get feedback from the team, making people aware of that. You made a point which I think is important, because I love telling, like I have this. With my teams, I'm kind of silly. I make jokes all the time, right? And unless there's something really serious going on, I tend to joke a lot. I really had to train myself that the only kind of jokes I can tell now in like a team situation are jokes that make fun of me. Right, because I used to be in teams and we kind of all give each other a hard time about stuff. I don't do that anymore. If I'm going to make fun of someone, I'm going to make fun of myself, and that's the only one I'm allowed to make fun of now that I'm a manager. Or, if you've ever done this, like you're on a Zoom and somebody joins the call, and you're like, I would do stuff like, oh, and this is why we're unhappy that Bruno, hey, how's it going? Or that kind of thing. And now I change it to, instead of saying that kind of thing, I now say it to, oh, and that's why Bruno's the best. Oh, Bruno, you joined us. And then it's you have to change your sense of humor. How you can still be silly, but you have to change the kind of way you talk about things.
Right.
Xavier says, the whole being vulnerable angle, vulnerability leading to trust. Any takes on that? I'll let you talk again, Bruno, and then I'll talk.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think you said something that goes into this question, is that you're allowed to say that you will make mistake. And actually, it's not because you become in a management position that you can't make mistakes. I don't know if I would call it being vulnerable, but maybe being honest. It's all about honesty. If you want people to trust you, if you want people to follow you, they have to trust you. They have to have a vision of where you're taking them. You're kind of like a boat's captain. You're not necessarily doing the job of taking the boat right down to the coast, but you have to tell people what you expect from them to do this, and you're not able to do it all, so you need them. I don't see it as vulnerable.
I think it's about being authentic. I think that's what you're saying. I think I'm paraphrasing what you just said, bro. Like, it's about being who you are. So I'll say, like, the being vulnerable thing, if it's an act, if you're pretending to be vulnerable but you're not, like, that's going to come off as really inauthentic and you'll lose trust with the team. But if you're actually open, and you're open to, like, get feedback and that kind of thing, that's, and you say that, I don't think it's necessarily a problem. I have kind of, like anything, like, you do too much, it can be bad. Right. So if you go too far, like, your heart is on your sleeve all the time and you're just incredibly fragile around the team, that's probably not good. But if you are open to feedback and you are open to learn and you are willing to listen and be transparent, I think that can be really, really positive with a team. But again, it comes kind of back down to company culture and the way the company is. If you're in a culture that is really not that way, and I've worked I am more that way, but I've worked in companies that aren't like that, you're just setting yourself up for a bad time if that is really not the dominant culture and you're kind of presenting this alternative, you're presenting a very different kind of persona to the dominant culture, that can be problematic. But if that is kind of something that is who you are and what the company is cool with, then no, it can be great. I would say the other part of this, being vulnerable with your team, being open, being transparent, being available to your team, that also shows a level of confidence, right? Like, you can tell me stuff and I'm going to listen to it and it's not going to hurt me. There's a strength in that, being vulnerable, being available to hear the kind of criticism from the team.
Mm-hmm.
Any tips to set up the environment culture to enable managers to give feedback?
Managees, actually.
It was a managees? Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's a tricky one.
It is.
Because unless you try to change the culture up top, if it's not in the way that you would see it, I think it will be hard, because what you will eventually be able to build with your team, if you leave and someone takes over your place and just takes back the upper management's culture, people will just be down. They'll be destroyed because they had something and one day to another they don't anymore. Ouch.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. But then again, depending on companies, that's a whole other topic. Changing a company's vision of what the culture can be. Some it will be easy. Some it will be extremely painful and probably even impossible.
I was in one of my prior roles, prior CTO roles. I worked with the leadership to really evolve the culture to be a much more human-centered kind of culture, like, while still being a serious engineering delivery kind of focus, but do it in a kind of healthier, kind of team-focused way. And it took a few years, but we were able to do it, and the team was really healthy, and we had this really great positive kind of culture of feedback and all that kind of thing. And then we got bought. To your point, we got bought by a company that was really, really different, and like the change was dramatic and instant, and it gave everybody whiplash. I still think I'm happy we did it, and I'm proud of what we did. I wouldn't have changed it unless I knew that was going to have happened. But so I still think it was worth doing. But yeah, it is something you have to be aware of. If you can do stuff within your team, you can create this culture of feedback within your team, or any kind of positive culture change. But you're absolutely right. Like, someday you're going to take a new job, and the people on your team are going to get a new manager, and hopefully they're going to get a manager kind of close to your culture, because if not, that team is going to have some challenges. But tips to actually create that kind of feedback: asking for it and then being cool about it. And you may have to ask for it in subtle ways, and you may have to ask for it in overt ways, and you may have to do it repeatedly until people know that they can give you feedback, and you're not going to retaliate if you don't if you don't like it. You just have to build trust around that. In some ways, it may be easier if you were a member of the team and now you're the lead,
right?
Because you go from being a peer. But if you kind of come into a new team that doesn't know you, you just tell people this. You ask them in your one-on-ones, like, hey, is there anything you think I could be doing better? And when they may not tell you first, but when eventually they feel comfortable enough with you to start giving you feedback, just make sure you handle it well and make sure you thank them for it. There's a great, I don't usually give talks in this position, but I have a book somewhere in here. It's tempting to try and find. I have a book called Thanks for the Feedback that we read in a previous team. It was really valuable as a way of kind of how do you take feedback well and encourage people to do it.
Maybe also it can start by giving them feedback. If you want to implement this kind of culture thing about receiving feedback, if you start by giving them some and showing them that Sometimes it will be good feedback, sometimes bad, but bad and good feedback don't have consequences. It's just, so we have this, it's really cool. We have this, we have to get better at this. Now, do you have feedback? So you're setting up the tone to allow them to open up.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really good suggestion. That's absolutely right on. Demonstrating the behavior and encouraging it, and encouraging them to give feedback to each other as well. So it's not just them to you and you to them.
Yeah, it has to be everyone. If every company was having people that always give feedback to anyone, whatever the level, wow.
Yeah. There are companies that are like that, and it is awesome. I used to work at Spotify, and at Spotify, it was amazing watching, even as the company grew, watching employees ask the founder, Daniel, the hardest questions and give him really direct feedback, in front of hundreds of their peers. And he was great. Okay, cool. And he would take the hardest questions, the biggest challenges, and just answer them honestly and straight on. That set a real example for the company. That was a great Spotify had a great culture of feedback when I was there. What makes a former developer turned manager a good manager, i.e. a non-development manager?
That one you can't put me up front because I'm still developing.
Yeah. I can talk for, I think, the folks that I've mentored and talk for myself a little bit. I think, it's what makes the benefit of coming from being a developer is you have this kind of deep level technical understanding, hopefully, before you moved into management, and that's going to change as you grow, and your scope of what you're paying attention to, it gets broader and that kind of thing. I talk about that in my Confoo talk on tomorrow, and this kind of specific thing. What I think makes a good manager is having still the empathy and understanding for the day-to-day of the developers on the team, right? You may not necessarily understand the specifics of what they're doing, but you understand what it's like to be a developer. But then marrying that with the kind of things that you would have liked in that role, right? So I always really liked managers being really transparent with me and telling me what's going on in the broader team. So that's one of the things I always try and do. And when I was a lead of a team, that's one thing I was just constantly doing, was making sure that folks had the kind of stuff I wish I'd had in their roles or when I was doing that job. Being interested in their work, paying attention to what's going on in the industry, giving them the information about what's going on in the company that they don't see. I think that transparency is really great, and having come from being that role, kind of doing the things that you would have liked in that role and modeling that kind of stuff. I think that helps a lot. Just kind of remembering what it was like to do the job, and trying to give people, give folks what you would have wanted when you're in the role. I think that helps a lot. Maybe
also giving them space to actually show what they can do. Maybe I would even push this further, but also show them or identify someone that you can try to train or to allow him, her to take your place eventually.
Yeah.
So if you have the mindset of one day I'll be moving on, whether it's upper somewhere else, we need to have someone who does my job. Let's go.
Yeah, succession planning and mentoring and growing folks and finding people that might want to do your job someday, and then giving them parts of your job until you can do the next job and they can do yours. Yeah. That's definitely valuable. I think you said something else in there that I also thought was really good, around giving them space. I think especially for a new kind of former developer, now manager, I think the thing you have to resist, and it's really hard, is to, not touch the keyboard.
Let me do it. Let me do it.
Let me do this for
No,
you.
no, no.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you may still be coding on the project, right? And probably if you're a new manager, you still are coding on the project. But, you know, again, like you have this role power now that you didn't have before. So if people are going to defer to you even when they think you're wrong. So giving people the space to do their job and trusting them. It's a little bit different when you're peers versus when, even like I said, like it's on Tuesday you were peers, on Wednesday you're now the manager. That introduces this subtle thing that takes you a while to even see, because you're the same person, but people don't look at you exactly the same way anymore. I gotta go in a minute, so
all right. Well, before we wrap up, are you okay if I take those questions part and that I try to get them in the video, in the final video? Because
sure,
that was really cool.
Okay, yeah, totally.
And speaking of which, thanks, Xavier and Andre. That was really good questions.
Yeah, you don't put this part in the video, but yeah, merci beaucoup. I can't do it with. How do you say?
No, that was.
No, that's French.
Yeah, that's merci beaucoup. It's thank you very much.
Right. No, that I knew. It's just like I was going to try and do a Quebecois version of it, but I can't. I need to spend more time in Quebec
practicing next year, maybe.
Yeah, I'm so disappointed. Like I was so looking forward. I'm so happy to be at Confoo because I've tried actually a few times to get in, but then I don't get to go.
Yeah, you're missing the food, which is
I know
incredible. Yeah.
Don't remind me.
Sorry. So yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks a lot for your extra time with the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Bruno. This was really fun. I had a really good time.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.